Hey guys, I'm Hop, and you're watching tfbtv, a channel recognized internationally for being huge Glock fanboys. It's no secret, James is a big fan of Glock pistols. I like Glock pistols a lot myself, although these days I'm getting more interested in aftermarket Glock clones. The big reason for that is optics. Pistol optics make everything about shooting a handgun better. They allow you to acquire a target faster, you get a target focus instead of a sight focus, you can shoot more accurately, faster, and farther. They're just way better than iron sights. But if you actually want to put an optic on a Glock pistol, your options get a little funky in a hurry. You can either get a regular Glock or the Glock you already have, send it away to get milled for the red dot pattern of your choice. Not an inexpensive process on top of the money you already paid for the pistol, plus there's the turnaround time of getting the pistol shipped off, worked on, and sent back before you can even put your red dot sight on there. The other option is to go with the Glock MOS pistols, which cost a little bit more than the base models, but have an interchangeable optics plate system. Unfortunately, nobody likes the Glock MOS plate system. It makes the optics sit pretty high, it adds an additional layer of interface that's really irritating. Also, despite the fact that the Glock MOS pistols are clearly intended to be used with a red dot sight, they don't come with co-witness iron sights, so you're going to have to replace those as well if you want co-witness sights. The extra time and money that it takes to get a factory Glock set up for use with the red dot sight is what makes a lot of the aftermarket Glock clones a little bit more appealing. One such pistol we're talking about today is the Lone Wolf Dusk 19. Lone Wolf is a company that was extremely well known for being part of the huge Glock aftermarket. They were one of the first companies that you could build an entire pistol with and not use a single Glock part. They were also extremely popular for people who were building 80% pistols because you could buy every single piece you needed to complete that gun from Lone Wolf, and then all you had to do was make your own 80% lower receiver, and boom, you've got a complete Glock without any Glock parts in it. However, the ATF has been doing their best to kill the concept of the 80% lower receiver. That throws Lone Wolf's entire business model into jeopardy, so what are they going to do? They're going to make the Dusk 19. This is a Glock clone made completely in-house by Lone Wolf. Let's take a closer look at it. The Lone Wolf Dusk 19 is mechanically a Generation 3 Glock 19 clone. That's how pretty much all of these Glock clones get their start, because the Generation 3 Glock 19 is at this point essentially an open platform. Lone Wolf has baked a couple of tricks into the Dusk 19, as well as some value-added features that make this thing a little bit more appealing than a factory Glock. For example, this is an optics-ready pistol. These things are milled for an RMR and come with lower third co-witness sights. So this is a legitimately optics-ready pistol, as opposed to the Glock MOS, which is kind of optics adjacent. This thing is a Generation 3 Glock 19. Essentially, it does have the original single recoil spring assembly of a Glock 19, but there's also a removable liner underneath the dust cover of this pistol. If you pop it out, then you've enlarged the channel in the dust cover, and that allows you to use Generation 4 Glock recoil springs. That means you could put a Generation 4 Plus upper on here if you didn't want to use the Generation 3 upper. I'm not sure why you would need to replace any parts on this pistol because it's pretty much a complete package already out of the box, but maybe that's just Lone Wolf's ode to their start as, a builder's platform. So if you do want to customize it, there are parts from Lone Wolf and other companies that'll go right on here. The frame is clearly a pretty big departure from the factory Glock. Glock frames are just an endless source of controversy. This one has a more upright grip angle and also extremely aggressive texture. This texture is kind of stands proud of the frame, and I think a lot of people look at that and assume that these are actually removable panels, but they're not. This is just a molded plastic frame with very aggressive and fairly beefy textured panels on the side. There is a replaceable back strap. There's a small one and then a slightly larger one included in the box. I've got the larger one on because it makes it feel a little bit more like a Glock to me and a little bit less like, I don't know, I guess 1911 grip angle is probably what they were going for with the stock back strap. The frame also departs a little bit more from Generation 3 Glock 19 because this has a 2-slot 1913 Picatinny accessory rail instead of the old proprietary Glock rail. This also has the very squared off trigger guard and the undercut that people really like so they can get a nice high grip without giving themselves Glock knuckle. Despite the changes to the frame contour, Lone Wolf says that this thing should be 100% compatible with Glock 19 holsters. I tried it out on a couple, including the T-Rex Sidecar Generation 1 that I carry my Gen 3 Glock 19 in. And yes, it does fit. I also tried it out in some Safariland duty holsters with retention mechanisms, and once again, perfect fit. So similar to the Shadow Systems MR920, there are some frame changes, but the overall geometry, the critical dimensions, like how tall the trigger guard is, still allows this thing to fit into Glock holsters. Another small change you can notice is that, like the Shadow Systems MR920, this actually has more of a Glock Generation 4 style magazine release instead of the very narrow button. That's a pretty big upgrade. I used to always put the high profile Glock magazine releases on my pistols. Just a little bit more surface area makes these things a lot easier to use. These also have I guess an upgraded trigger out of the box, although for my money, if you upgrade a Glock trigger to the point where it feels like anything but a Glock trigger, it becomes unsafe and risky. This one feels very much like a stock Glock trigger, but it does have a metal trigger shoe and a flat face to it. And the trigger dingus little safety blade in the middle does go flush with the trigger. So I know that's one of those little nitpicks that people have about Glock factory triggers. To me, this still feels very similar in pull weight and crispness to a Glock trigger. So in other words, it's heavy and spongy because that's how Glocks work. That's what we like about them. Another improved control is the extended and enlarged slide release lever. This looks almost identical to the factory Glock part that comes on the Glock 34. It's also just a really popular modification to make to other Glock pistols. I really like these. I don't think you need to go much more overboard than this. If you've got one of those Cogworks levers that comes all the way up over the slide, then yeah, just don't talk to me anymore. You're not a good person and I don't like you. Up top, we've got a very tastefully machined slide with forward serrations, which is pretty nice. Once you put a red dot on here, you may not want to be palming the face of your red dot all the time to do any sort of slide manipulations, so being able to grasp by the front, always a nice feature. Also, they just didn't go overboard with it. The contours are very nice, and you can get these in a variety of different colors. You can also get these in SKUs that have threaded barrels. I think suppressing handguns is an absolute waste of a tax stamp, but hey, if you really want to do it, it's a free country for now. These have a RMR cut on the top. They come with a little cover plate. This is not going to be as versatile as the complete like Omni mounting system of the Shadow Systems MR920, but you know what? You can find a red dot for you in the RMR footprint, let's be honest, especially considering that Trijicon has now released the enclosed emitter RCR that still direct mounts to the RMR footprint. There's really not too much reason to go with anything other than the RMR cut. Looks like it's going to be around for quite a while. There is something to note: if you do have a Glock slide that's direct milled for an RMR, one of these screw holes is actually going to bore all the way through into the ejector rod channel. This is something that I've noticed before. If you mount a holosun on here, I believe that the screws that come with it are a little bit too long. The screw will impinge onto the rod that puts force on the extractor. I probably said ejector earlier, but yeah, they're basically the same word. Anyway, if you just crank those screws in without checking, you're probably going to put some pressure, bind up that rod, and then your extractor is no longer going to work properly. So just, you know, keep that in mind. There are instructions in the manual of this pistol to watch out for that. So just follow those pretty closely. I think if you get an RMR, the screws that it comes with are going to be properly sized for that purpose. The Dusk 19 does come with night sights out of the box. I think it'd be weird if a pistol called the Dusk 19 didn't have night sights. These are from Night Vision. There is a green tritium front and a black serrated rear. These are also taller than your average Glock factory sights, so they will co-witness through probably most optics, almost anything that can direct mount to RMR. Last thing of note, inside the box are two 15-round magazines from KCI. It's kind of an interesting departure. Almost all of the Glock clones that I've messed with have included the Magpul Glock mags, which are decent, but I've never been quite sure if I could trust them. I had issues periodically with the followers binding in the mag bodies, so maybe that's the reason why they decided to go with the Korean-made KCI mags, which are a much closer clone of actual Glock magazines. We'll see how they work. I'm also going to, of course, shoot this thing with a bunch of Glock P mags, because I've got a bunch of them piling up and it's just time to use them as range mags. Anyway, let's go ahead and shoot this thing some more, see what we get. So far, I've had the Dusk 19 out for 2 different range trips, and on the first trip, I had a bunch of problems. I was shooting 115 grain Norma ammunition and getting a lot of light primer strikes. I wasn't sure if I should blame the ammunition or if I should blame the gun. This freaking Norma is killing me, dude. This stuff fucking sucks. What the hell is wrong with it today?
When I got the Dusk 19, it was packed full of grease. It was like a horror show in there. Now, that could just be to protect the internals from corrosion during shipping, or it could be sort of like the copper anti-seize in factory Glocks, meant to aid in break-in over the first couple hundred rounds. After the first range trip, I cleaned out the grease and re-lubricated the gun with regular oil, and when I went back out to the range, I took the Norma ammunition as well as some Federal 124 grain.
So if we compare some empty cases between the Federal and the Norma, we can see that there's a very deep, solid strike on the Federal and a very faint strike on the Norma, still enough to get this one to go off apparently. Suggesting to me that there's something out of spec on the Norma. It's causing it to not, maybe it's sitting weird in the chamber, maybe the primers are seated too deeply. Kind of looks like it's the primer depth issue. So all of the Federals look like this, nice and strong, and all the Normas look like this, just pitiful. We're going to try to prove that the issue is actually ammunition related. Have a 21 round stick of Federal. Here goes nothing. It's ammo.
Currently, the Dusk 19 is at a little bit over 400 rounds, and all of the failures that I've had were with Norma ammunition, and I've had no failures with Federal, so I guess that answers that question. In the first couple of mags, I was also having a hard time hitting my small gong targets. They're 8-inch gongs, and I had them at about 20 yards, which is usually not a difficult shot to make with a handgun. The sights on the Dusk 19 are definitely combat or defensive style sights, not precision-oriented sights. There's a lot of air gap between the front sight blade and the rear notch. That makes them fast to acquire but suboptimal for shooting groups. Out of curiosity, I put the Dusk 19 on paper next to my Gen 3 Glock 19, which has a set of aftermarket sights from XS.
So out of curiosity, I wanted to see where these sights are regulated. So on the left is the Dusk 19, 10 yards with a combat hold. That's the way I usually shoot. I don't think it's the best way to shoot Glocks most of the time because this is my Gen 3 Glock 19. And as expected, if I use a combat hold at 10 yards, the sights are regulated a little bit high. These sights seem to be regulated pretty much perfectly at 10 yards, maybe slightly low. So I think that's actually how I prefer it, but this is what I'm used to. So it's a little weird. So now that we know the sights are actually regulated a little bit low and not high, I think we should be able to actually hit these a little better. Keep getting duds on these Normas. Not a good sign.
After adjusting my hold for the way the sights were regulated on the Dusk 19, I had no further issues making hits. So that leaves us with two questions to answer about the Dusk 19. One, would I take it over a factory Glock, either a regular Glock to get milled for an optic, or an MOS Glock? And number two, would I take it over the Shadow Systems MR920, which is my current favorite as far as the aftermarket of Gucci Glock clones goes? Well, as I alluded to in the intro, I'm not a fan of the Glock MOS system, and I don't want to send my factory Glock off to get milled, so that's why I've been carrying my G19 Gen 3 with iron sights for a while. I'm just not that motivated to have it hacked up so I can stick an RMR on there. Dethroning the Shadow Systems MR920 is going to be a lot harder. The configuration of the Dusk 19 I have runs at about $650. That's substantially cheaper than the top-end version of the MR920, which is more of a $1,000 pistol. However, Shadow Systems did introduce a cheaper variant of the MR920 called the Foundation series, and that one retains the same option for the extremely nice Universal Optics cut. It drops the tritium night sights, which is honestly fine by me, since those sights are just a backup option for the red dot anyway, and also they don't work great with night vision, and I am a bit of a nerd for night vision. I think the deciding factor between the MR920 Foundation and the Dusk 19 is really going to be the grip. The MR920 has a very mild grip texture, which a lot of people are probably going to prefer for carry. The grip texture on the Dusk 19 is extremely aggressive, probably more than it needs to be even for shooting purposes, but when it comes to carrying, it's really onerous. I'm not sure I like the idea of that grip texture rubbing up against my soft, glowing underbelly weak point all day. If you think of the Dusk 19 as more of a duty pistol, competition pistol, or combat pistol, then it probably doesn't matter nearly as much. And just like the MR920, Glock holster compatibility is a huge benefit. There's another even cheaper Glock clone that is putting pressure on both of these pistols from the bottom end of the market, and that is the Palmetto State Armory Dagger, which is now available in multiple configurations and optics cuts. But this video is already running long, so we're going to have to come back to that one another time.
Well, guys, that's the show. It's starting to rain out here, so I'm probably going to finish this one back in the studio, but you won't know that because you'll have already seen the conclusion by the time you're seeing this bit. So, thank you very much for watching. TFB TV is supported by our sponsors, Ventura Munitions and Top Gun Supply. We are also supported by our viewers like you via Subscribestar and Player. So go ahead and look us up on those platforms. If you join up, you'll be eligible for a bunch of giveaways that James puts together. You also get to watch a behind-the-scenes Q&A type video series, which is quite enjoyable, if I do say so myself, as long as the questions are enjoyable. So sometimes they're deliberately hostile. But anyway, see you guys next time.